he really wanted Bernie to win in 2016. And now here he is, on the right and favorable towards Trump, et cetera. And I'll tell you, Emma, for a long time, I really resisted the whole Bernie to Trump pipeline conversation. But at this point, it's just undeniable.
Emma Vigeland was a guest of Breaking Point's Krystal Ball to talk about Bernie Sanders' appearance on Andrew Schulz's podcast. And, progressives going on these alt-right or, bro-y podcasts. Also, they talk a little bit about the idea that Democrats need their own sort of Joe Rogan, a Joe Rogan of the left. And this is a little bit older, but it's still an interesting conversation. So why don't we watch Krystal Ball and Emma Vigeland discuss? Let's check it out.
So interesting comments from Andrew Schulz and Charlemagne, who were, talking about the state of the Democratic Party and the state of the country at large. Let's go ahead and take a listen. They were reflecting also a little bit on that Bernie Sanders conversation with Flagrant, which did you watch that, Emma?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was really good overall, although I would say that Bernie's had some great conversations with some of this people in this podcast sphere, and they still go right, like Rogan, but we'll see.
True.
I mean,
well, he's only one man. What can you do?
Exactly.
All right, let's go ahead and take a listen to this clip.
You know what your reflection is? And Bernie said it on Flagrant. Everybody's blamed. This ain't a Democrat thing. It's not a Republican thing. This is government has failed the people. We live in a capitalist society where you got all of these all the wealth. Elon Musk has more wealth than more than half of the bottom of America. Yeah. Like, come on. Yeah. Like, there's no way we live in a society that claims to be the most wealthiest society on the planet and we can't fix homelessness.
Well, in that case, the Democrats' pivot should be to go more socialist.
Yeah.
Which I'm fine with.
Yes, they should.
Yeah.
That's what everybody's saying.
And that's Bernie.
That's what everybody's saying.
Because the Republican solution to what you just described is going to be
deregulate
capitalism.
So they say the Democrat solution should be to go more socialist. What do you think, Emma?
I love to hear that, obviously. I think, that there's more of an appetite for this. I know you've spoken about this a lot, within, Democratic voters than I have seen, since I've been doing this professionally or since I've been paying attention to politics. Where there's this understanding where it's like we see Donald Trump wield the executive branch in a way, sometimes in ways I think are stretching the boundaries of our law, to put it mildly, but with the desire to govern and to be aggressive with his vision, however much I may disagree with many parts of that vision. It's highlighted the weakness of the Democrats, which also I think was evident in how Netanyahu quite clearly had his finger on the pulse of how weak the Democratic Party is, how he could exploit that tension there. And you see it in also electoral results with the Democrats, right? It's encouraging to hear that, just because I think I was just having a conversation with one of my good friends from growing up, who listens to Rogan and listens to Theo Vaughn and things like that. And she was just talking about how Bernie Sanders makes a lot of sense when he goes on some of these shows. And I wish every Democrat could be talking about healthcare like that. This person's also kind of interested in RFK. And you see how, with the right having success in certain areas, say, let's take RFK Jr. and Trump adopting him into his coalition, for example. There's this massive anxiety in this country that people have around the issue of healthcare. And it's not just because they're worried about getting sick. Everybody in the world has that concern. But it's because medical debt is the number one cause of bankruptcy in this country. It's because you have anxiety that you're going to have to pay hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for routine visits to check if you're okay. You're going to have to pay a bunch of money if your kid has some sort of condition to see a specialist. There's a general anxiety that people feel when they relate to their healthcare. What RFK Jr. has proposed for people is a vision that is more libertarian, right? Where he's not in favor of a socialized healthcare system, but he does address people's anxiety and then sells them solutions that are a bit bespoke, or his whole ecosystem is about, if you purchase certain supplements or if you do this kind of action, you individually can take control of your healthcare and it can empower you. I think that's what he sells. That's more of a libertarian view. But it has a narrow overlap with a leftist socialist vision that I wish we could kind of absorb into what we're advocating here, which is that, yes, you are right to feel anxiety about your healthcare. And here's how we can fix it: by cutting out the middleman between you and your healthcare and making it so that you have a direct relationship and you have socialized government insurance, and that we will guarantee healthcare for all as a right. We will fund it by taxing the billionaire class and not make it harder on your wallet. And those are just some of the ways that this vision is so much more poignant when you contrast it with the right, even the right that gestures towards things like economic populism or towards empowering you over your healthcare. So, you see how like these traditional paradigms of left and right, these consultants in DC on the Democratic side are missing it, and they're paid to miss it. But like, you can have somebody coming on Andrew Schulz's podcast who the other week he said that, now he likes the Republicans because they get laid all the time.
Deep political analysis, yes.
Right. He can, and I have actually some other thoughts on that, but like he can have that view, but he can also say the Democrats should become more socialist. Like, this is what the independent voter is. It's not somebody who's like afraid of trans people.
Right. It's not ideologically consistent either.
I think Emma Vigeland and Krystal Ball are right on the money here. I agree. Just to get back to the socialism thing, right? I mean, what we're calling socialism now is something that the right wing loves to compare with communism and, just these crazy extremes. And I don't think anything even socialist like the Mamdani in New York City, I don't think any of that is particularly radical sounding in the first place. But in terms of healthcare, in terms of, what RFK Jr. is selling, this idea of like this kind of libertarian vision of like, if you get sick, it's probably because you're eating bad things and you're not taking care of yourself. That's an easy cop-out to blame the victim, as it were. But that probably works with a lot of the kind of Joe Rogan listeners and viewers because maybe it's mostly young males, but they don't really have some of the health issues that older people would have to deal with. And you could be the healthiest person in the world and get in a car accident. You can get injured. You could find out you have cancer, right? And all these bromides and snake oil isn't going to help you with that. And they happen all the time, maybe more frequently to people who are a little older than some of the Rogan listeners. But I think that's one area in when their Democrats need to dial in. And they are hammering Medicare for all, but I think they can really break that down in more meaningful ways that are relatable. Bernie Sanders and AOC, I think, are doing this on their tour. Of course, exercising and eating healthy will certainly, it's not a bad idea. That's a good idea for your health. I'm certainly not saying that. But in terms of what's going on with Andrew Schulz and these guys saying, hey, we need to be more socialist, right, Charlemagne? This is the opportunity for the Democrats. And I think what we saw in New York City is a perfect example of this. And yet it seems to have the kind of mainstream Democrats in a panic. I don't know if it's because it threatens their money. I mean, maybe you don't have to look any farther than that, but it's like they keep wanting to just stay Republican light, and they're going to keep losing elections, right? So we need an alternative because the Republicans, the GOP, is just the party of MAGA now, and it's nuts. But Emma Vigeland, Krystal Ball kind of talk about this stuff all the time. Kyle Kalinske on his channel, the people I do. But, if you actually want to transform the DNC into a party that's going to beat the Republicans, you've got to have AOC and Bernie Sanders and other people like the members of the squad, Mayor Pete, whoever can get out there and actually make a clear and fervent case for these, what feel like, they don't feel radical, they feel like common sense policies, right? And they've got to, Mayor Pete does this, Pete Buttigieg does this. He goes on outlets and shows that other Democrats are kind of they're afraid of the gotchas, and he is not. And the Democrats really need to take a lesson from that and get out there and talk to these audiences.
Schulz, from my conversation with Bernie, I picked up that he had been a Bernie bro. He really wanted Bernie to win in 2016. And now here he is, on the right and favorable towards Trump, et cetera. And I'll tell you, Emma, for a long time, I really resisted the whole Bernie to Trump pipeline conversation. But at this point, it's just undeniable. And, part of that is certainly like the way that the bros in the Bernie coalition were smeared. All of us were smeared, by the way, as like toxic and sexist and racist and all these sorts of things.
You and I, we just hate women. Obviously.
Just hate women. That's what we're really known for here. But, the whole movement was smeared, but in particular, the bros were smeared. And so that's certainly part of it. But part of it is just this sense that, Trump was critical. And again, this is surface level. I'm not talking about the reality of the fact that he serves oligarchs perhaps more than any other Republican president in history has.
Yeah.
But he critiqued the party. He felt like he was a change and, not sort of in the mainline old school Republican Party. Bernie had that same like critique of the Democratic Party. And at a time when faith in institutions has been broadly broken, like you have to be a critic from the outside. And that's how you can end up with someone who's like favorable George Trump, but is also like, hey, Democrats should try socialism. And I have to tell you, I think the biggest challenge, Emma, that we have on the left right now is getting people to have faith in any sort of possibility of a collective project. That's why the libertarian appeal of like, well, you can work out, well, you can better yourself, well, you can take these supplements. Sure, the world is going to shit, but here's things in your life that you can have control over. That's why that has appeal right now. And, it reminds me, I think it has historical echoes with like the 1970s, the back to the land movement where people tried the 60s, like collective change. It didn't work out. People were getting assassinated and they're like, all right, well, forget it. We're just checking out and we're going to go live on like a commune in Vermont and see what we can individually do in our own lives, separate and apart from society. And I do think that there is a pretty healthy strain of that right now where it's like, I just don't, where a lot of people feel that there isn't a possibility of meaningful collective action that can better everyone's lives. And especially when you talk about, these big threats that are coming, like, I think people are increasingly concerned about technology and AI and what that's going to mean for all of us and what it's going to mean for our kids, et cetera. Like, I feel that instinct of like, let me just go live in the woods and disconnect.
Enclose.
And like try to protect me and mine and whatever. Like I understand where that instinct comes from.
Right. And Naomi Klein and Astra Taylor had a piece that I've been recommending to everybody in The Guardian maybe a month ago at this point about the rise of end times fascism. And just
you did a great interview with her about that, by the way.
Wonderful. Yeah. I want to hear what you guys had to say too, but just the idea that like of fortressing yourself, right, in this time period and fortressing the nation, protectionism, and even the way that the administration operates where, we're just going to get ours. Like Trump is maybe the most pro-oligarch president in history, but it's really his or pro-billionaire, but it's really his billionaires too. Like he's very focused on the folks that have benefited him and is trying to scratch their back, to a degree. But like, I do want to be clear that I think, when Andrew Schulz's comment about how he used to be a Democrat because like, can I swear on the show?
Yeah, you can swear on the show, yes.
Okay, because they fucked or like, because like, Bill Clinton was a badass or whatever. And now he's all on board with Trump. He's got all the baby mamas. He's cool. I just want, part of me was like, you think Obama would have been able to get elected if he was like bragging about how many baby mamas he had, or if Hillary Clinton was like, yeah, I get laid, like, so I or Kamala Harris. I mean, honestly, there was a lot. The opening attack on her was that she slept her way to the top. And when I want to bring in the voters that, we're speaking about here, the Bernie or Trump people, the folks that are sometimes unnecessarily smeared as being like sexist or misogynist, but they just want somebody who wants to break up the system. But there is something that if we're trying to also, at least from my end, the progressive left meld with Democratic voters, we should acknowledge that like the messenger also is important to some of these voters. Like they can listen to Bernie Sanders, but they tuned out Kamala Harris, who like, if Trump had been putting forward the abundance agenda about deregulating housing and building more and more and giving X amount to first-time home buyers like Harris was doing, which was a more centrist kind of liberal, not left-wing policy, I don't think any of these guys would have had a problem with it. So there is that. I want to recognize that because I think that's important for, like, say, the base of the Democratic Party. In many ways, these are people who feel like when Republicans get into power, it's an existential threat to them if they're a marginalized group. And that's really important that we have to incorporate. But it's also true that the independent voter isn't just how it's being characterized. The MAGA people, it's tough. There are the too far gones. But there are this group of folks who are open to different ideologies politically that they wouldn't have been, say, 20 or 30 years ago along this very convenient spectrum for our ruling class of left versus right. There are people that are listening to this show that may like Trump, but may also hear Bernie and go, I just want somebody that's going to change things for my life. And these Democrats, they come off like bureaucrats. They don't offer anything transformational.
I think this is a fantastic point that Emma Vigeland makes here about not the message, but the messenger. I think most people vote with their guts. I think most people aren't thinking really deeply about the implications of this or that issue. I think a lot of people voted for Trump because they were feeling economic pain and he said he was going to make it better. And even though he had been a disaster 4 years before, they went for that because they were voting with their guts. I think she's talking about independence here, but I think, people aren't focused on the minutia of policy. They just want somebody who's decisive, somebody who they think is going to be a strong leader, ideally somebody they like and respect, is going to illustrate strong leadership. And I think, especially to these Andrew Schulz kind of like broadcast dudes like Rogan, you can't look wimpy. You can't be too woke. You can't, and Bernie Sanders is certainly not cool, but he's tough. Bernie Sanders has been saying the same thing for his entire 40-year political career. He stands on his principles. He's able to articulate his beliefs. And he comes off as voters as decisive, and he's telling the truth. I think authenticity is a word you hear a lot in Bernie Sanders and AOC, both convey, and Pete Buttigieg, all convey, and now this Mamdani in New York City, all convey this authenticity. They're talking and you listen and you believe them, whether or not you agree with it. I think most voters listen to the things they're saying and think, that sounds pretty good, because life has gotten more and more expensive and I'm not making any more money and we need a change. And all I hear about are these billionaires sending Katy Perry to space, and it's like, I'm sick of it, right? I think in 2016 and also in 2020, where it was people were thinking about Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders as sort of a first and second choice. These two guys couldn't be more different in terms of their ideology, but Donald Trump, like Emma Vigeland is saying, I think are saying a lot of the same things. I think Bernie means it and Trump is just telling people what they want to hear. But this idea that both candidates, or I'm going to fight for you, right? I'm going to fix things. The system is rigged. It's a lot of the same populist language. And whether or not, it's flabbergasting to me that especially even after 2016, after a first Trump term, that people still would think that this is a man who's going to tell you the truth. Again, I think people vote with their guts. And, I think Emma Vigeland is right when she says voters looked at both men as fighters who would stand up for them. And that was the perception, right? And as we see now, truth has been eroded to the point that perception is reality, right? Alternate facts, to quote Kellyanne Conway. But let me know what you think all of this in the comments. Obviously, Emma Vigeland and Krystal Ball are people that I do a lot on here. I've done an Andrew Schulz thing before. Do you think we can get these bro podcast guys like Andrew Schulz and Joe Rogan? Joe Rogan had Bernie Sanders on and was sounded like he was seeing the truth of it. But then I think Joe Rogan is an affable dude who just kind of goes along with whatever his guest is saying. And that's just his kind of MO. So I don't know that there's an ideology that he cleaves to. And I would love to see AOC. I mean, Bernie Sanders too old to run, I think, at this point. And AOC, I'm just not confident that America would elect a woman, even a dynamo, as the top of the ticket. But let me know what you think in the comments.